Mhm.
Awesome. Good morning, Carrie.
Oh, goodness. Good morning.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm so good. I was telling Joyce, I just arrived in St. George about 5 minutes ago. So glad I made it on time to make the call.
Awesome. Well, is it sunny and beautiful there?
You know what? We hit snow most of the way down here. So
Mm.
it's clearing up though. So that's good because we've got another hour or so down to Vegas for our 4 after this. So, all right. Hey, Carrie, Janet, if you feel so obliged, unless you're, sitting in your bedroom, not put together for the day, throw your video on. It sure makes the call a lot easier for me if you can, but if not, that's fine.
Okay.
All right, guys.
I've been working all morning, but I am literally sitting here in my robe, so you can't see me in my robe. But I've been working since 7 o'clock. Does that
That's
count?
And I'm put together. I'm just wondering where the special filter is that makes us look better.
right. Yeah. Carrie,
Well,
that's all you have to do is use one of those things that makes you into a cat or something, and
There
then
you
you'd be
go.
golden.
Nothing's
right.
going to undo my robe, so I guess I'm just going to leave it off. But I'm here.
All right. Well, on that high note, we are recording, by the way. So,
Uh-oh.
all right. Well, so you guys know that every 2 weeks when I run this call, I want to cover 2 or 3 of the administrative rules, and this week will be no different. So actually, I need to share my screen. I can't just toggle. Give me 2 seconds. All right. So on my screen, you should be able to see the administrative rules. And this week, I wanted to cover 14, 15, and 16. So I know the excitement's killing you, but this really is important stuff. It's the rules come into play predominantly when something goes sideways. Can you guys see this okay? Just give me a head nod. All right, perfect. All right, so rule number 14. We all know section 5 of the paragraph, and I still get this years later after we've had section 5. It's like, well, whose name should I put in there? Well, the division makes it very clear. You can either put my name, your principal broker, or you can put the brokerage name, right? If you put my name, you need to put my license. If you put the brokerage name, you need to put the brokerage's license number, which you can look up on Realms. It's not that hard to do. And then, of course, the last part of 14 is, and oh, by the way, fulfill your licensee agency relationships that you declare. So that one was not super important, but 15, this is the one that I deal with a lot, right? And just to kind of show why this is applicable, when I run into problems with agents, let me say that a different way. When agents call me saying, I have a problem with one of my files or with one of my transactions, right? My first thing I'm going to do, what am I going to do? Brandon, what am I going to do? You call me and say, I've got a problem on 123 Main Street. What's the first thing I'm going to do?
Where's your contract?
Would you guess? What's that?
Where's the contract?
Well, yeah, I'm going to go right to Sky Slope and I'm going to search for 123 Main Street. And probably at least 30% of the time, it comes up with nothing. And so then I have to have some version of this following conversation with the agent. I'm like, well, where's your file? Oh, well, I've got it here somewhere. And sometimes it's a paper version floating around somewhere, or they've got it in an email. I'm like, that's great, but let me just tell you what the company policy is. And it's not just the company policy, it's the DRE, right? So rule number 15, timely inform the licensee's principal broker or branch broker of a real estate transaction in which the licensee is involved as an agent or a principal. The licensee has received funds on behalf of the broker, or an offer has been written. So this actually does cover ERS, EBB, and REPSI. And you can see my little note on the right. Our company and ICA indicate this is to be accomplished by turning the paperwork into the brokerage. That should be obvious to everybody, but apparently it's not. In fact, I was having a conversation with an agent the other day, and well, actually my office manager had down in PG hey, good morning, Josh, had had indicated that, you know, was having a hard time getting an ERS and an EBB and, exclusive buyer broker agreement and the due diligence, and had a conversation with the agent and just kind of reiterated this, right? It doesn't, the division doesn't say turn those in if you have a successful transaction. Their starting point is if you sign an agreement with somebody, an ERS or an EBB, your broker and brokerage are to have a copy in a reasonable period of time. And, you know, with the division of real estate, reasonable typically means within 1 or 2 business days. All right. Now, here's something that came up in that conversation that I thought I would just share with you guys too, not to make things seem overburdening, but do you realize in the division rules, it says that you're also to turn into your brokerage any offers written, period, accepted or not. Do you know that one, Brandon?
Yeah, I knew it.
Yeah.
I mean, I do it.
Yeah. And the reason for that, I've had a lot of questions from agents is why, right? Why? Well, you can imagine a scenario where we represent somebody, we put an offer in that's not successful, and then they have a complaint, whether it's valid or not, and they call up the DRE, or better yet, they go online and fill out the 1-page PDF form and submit a complaint. And that processes through the division of real estate. And the next call we get is, hey, we want everything you have on this transaction. It's a bad thing for us to be like, I don't have any paperwork on this. That's just a red flag for the DRE to look even deeper. So the whole reason for bringing all that up is we've trained the office managers on where to archive these. If you have one, literally email it, hand it off to your office manager and just tell them this was an unsuccessful closing, and they know how to archive that within SkySlope. So we always have a record. All right. Any questions on that? If not, I'm going to number 16. All right, number 16, disclose in writing to each party to a transaction any compensation in addition to any real estate commission to be received in connection with a real estate transaction. So look at my note there on the right. This is one that is actually applicable to us because of our configuration being owned by AIG, right? This is why outside of the CFPB, which is the federal regulatory body, that the AIG disclosure is so important. If there's any way that you, the company, is going to receive additional compensation, you must declare it. That's not just a CFPB thing. That is actually one of your administrative rules from the Division of Real Estate. So even to this day, right? What is it? 3+ years since AIG formally kicked off, I still get people like, why do I need to fill that up? My people are not even using the services of that company. That's not the hurdle we're jumping. We actually have to disclose. So anyway, and is everybody aware that we changed the format of that? It's no longer an addendum. It's not an AIG addendum to the ERS or the EBB. We have now made it a standalone document, which it should have been, in my opinion, all along. It's a disclosure. You can send it with your EBB, but it doesn't really amend any terms in the exclusive buyer broker agreement. So that's why it's now a standalone document. Okay. All right. I can tell you're all excited about all that information. So let me move on to something a little more exciting. Matt,
it took me a minute to get my unmute. On that document, I don't know that I have that. Has that been sent out to all of us? I have used the addendum on my last transactions, so I'm not sure I've actually seen that one, and I'm sure I've overlooked it. What's that, Brandon?
It's in SkySlope.
It's in SkySlope.
Forms,
okay.
So when you go into the forms section via the MLS or through our console, there's the UAR forms, and then there are broker specific forms, and it's in there. And you know what, listen, if you did use the addendum, it doesn't invalidate anything. It's just, this is probably a more appropriate way to do it going forward. So
okay, thank you.
Okay. Yep. Let me grab this, and then I'm going to share my screen one more time. So one of the things that we run across, right, on a very regular basis in transacting business, whether it's the buyer or the seller. Well, let me start with this before I jump into that. I've had a couple conversations recently on this. What is our responsibility we have a fiduciary of confidentiality and loyalty to our clients, right? Buyer or seller, right? But then certain questions get asked that don't seem to fit very cleanly in that. So Parker, I'm gonna pick on you. What's one of the craziest things you've been asked by another agent to, as far as like, if you had a listing, what is the craziest thing you've had somebody ask that kind of falls in this confidentiality realm?
Oh, gosh.
There's a lot to choose from, right?
I mean, anytime you have a listing, someone's always trying to get a little bit of an opening into the mind frame of your seller. So, I mean, I've just been like,
Have you ever got this, Parker? Have you ever got, hey, how much is the seller willing to take? How low will they go?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Probably the most obvious one and the most consistent one is, you know, hey, so one, why is your seller moving? Which is maybe it's a little bit one, but that can open up the floodgates. And two is, so is this the lowest your seller is going to go? Come on, I'm sure they can do better.
Okay, this is going to be confessions of a principal broker. Back in the day when I was a producing agent, that was my favorite thing to do. Is I would look at any of the properties that my client was interested in. I'd look at kind of what the supposed expiration date was. And if we were closing in towards an expiring period, I was dang sure I was going to be like, hey, Parker, looks like your listing's about ready to expire. What do you need? What does your seller need to get this done? Now, you know, on the surface, that sounds like I'm helping Parker, right? But inadvertently, I'm essentially asking him to violate his fiduciary of confidentiality and loyalty. And it happens all the time. I'm not held to those fiduciaries because they're not my client.
You don't know if he's got permission to share that or not. Just ask.
Well, you're absolutely right, Brandon. How many people though do you, if you were to venture a guess, how many people go and get, by the way, it's supposed to be written instructions from your seller, what they can disclose? I would say it's probably less than 10%, right? Now, listen,
Brandon,
yeah.
the counter to that, which I always say because I do get that question as well. Well, have your sellers authorized you to tell me if this is the highest offer, or, you know, like in a multiple offer situation or something like that? And my answer is always,
you're lucky if they're that nice.
Yeah. But my answer has always been, the seller has not authorized me to tell you that information. And I just leave it at that.
Well, so it can even get as mundane as, do you have more than one offer? Do you already have an offer, right? All of these things, when you think of them in the course of your career, they seem pretty tame, right? But my point in kind of using these examples is to show how quickly you can run afoul of your fiduciary of confidentiality and loyalty to your client, right? Did your client indicate that you could tell them there was already an offer or multiple offers? Did they give you permission to say how low they would go on their price? Did they give you permission to say what their motivation is for me? Well, you know, he's got a job in Texas that he's starting, you know, in 2 weeks. He's got to get out of here. That totally is not acceptable for your seller, right? But everybody on this call knows it happens, right? It happens. Hopefully it's not us giving, it's us receiving, in which case, you know, shame on them for offering it up and it helps our clients. But if you're representing a seller, you just need to be highly aware of that. Now, one of my favorite ones, and it was really more a year ago because of all the hot offers that were going on. What do I need to do to buy this house, right? And or what's most important to your seller? How quickly do they need to be out? All of these things, they're valid for us as buyers agents to ask, right? But we really need to be careful when we're representing a seller going, does that have the possibility of putting my seller at a disadvantage? Is it really a disadvantage for the buyer's agent and their client to know that I've got to be in Texas in 2 weeks? What does that do to your offer?
It's rough.
Yeah, it's rough. That's a succinct description. And if I were to venture a guess, you're probably not going to be offering top dollar. If I had come back and said, yeah, we have no offers on the table, that seems pretty mundane, right? I haven't been given permission. I mean, it should be obvious from the MLS. It's either in an active status or it's under contract or backup offers. But things in real time, I still shouldn't be offering that. No, we don't have any offers. So I'm going to flip the coin on that.
Matt, the two parts of that too are also, this very much applies to limited agency. Even more so
I'm
because
coming to limited
we're really
agency.
stepping into some waters there, but also
Hold that thought. Hold
Okay.
that thought.
All right.
So if somebody, that's the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, how do you listen, we all want a good working relationship with the agent on the other side, right? Because there's nothing worse than working through an antagonistic relationship on the other side, right? It's nice when you have somebody that understands we're both working to try and get this deal done, so both of our clients benefit and so both of us get paid. I don't know, that seems like an adult approach. So when somebody asks something inappropriate, I'm not proposing that you fire off and like, I am not going to violate my fiduciaries and kind of talk down to the person. So how do we gently put them on track? Daryl. Good morning, Daryl. John, you stab at that?
Can you broaden that scenario a little bit more?
Okay, so Parker, I just asked you if you have, because this is one of the most commons, right? Do you have more than one offer? And if the answer is yes, let me take it a step further. Well, what's the current offer?
The seller hasn't authorized me to tell you that information.
Say it nicely, Parker, so you maintain our good working relationship.
Man, you know I can't tell you that.
Yeah. Can I reverse it? John, I appreciate your laughter because it really is true, but this is where we are more the professionals to be like, hey, John, I really want to get a deal done with you, but you've been in the business a long time. I've been in business in a long time. And I can't go there until my seller gives me specific directions to divulge that information. Is that fair? I mean, always turn it back to them in a question. Do you understand? Does it make sense? Is that fair? What are they going to say? No, I really want you to, now that you've explained it's one of your fiduciaries, I want you to violate it. It puts them in a very awkward situation to continue pressing on that. Right.
Fair enough. Yep.
But fair enough. There you go. And you're reinforcing that, hey, I still want to work with you and be pros and let's get the deal done. Don't get territorial and dig your feet and be like, you should know better. What are you, some dumbass agent? That's probably not a good approach.
Well, they're a good agent. If they're looking
Hey,
out for
or John, it's kind of comical too. It's like, hey, John, you know what? When I'm on the buyer side, I ask the very same questions, but you've listed properties and you know what our fiduciaries are. And right now my seller hasn't given me permissions. Fair enough. Right. And you move on.
I find laughter along that line of, that's great question. I'd ask it too, but I can't answer that. So do your best.
What other
take a little bit of a personable approach.
Yeah. What other information can I provide you?
Mm-hmm.
Right. That connotes that I'm still trying to work to get the deal done, but that particular item I just can't give to you.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And by the way, Joyce, I'm happy to ask the seller if he'll let me divulge that, but right now I can't give you that info.
Right.
All that is the spirit of cooperation. And they're like, okay, we're still a team. We're still working together. Right.
One of the worst things that I've heard and seen agents do over the years is they think that they're going to produce a higher offer. They'll say, well, we've got two offers, but they're not good, or they're both quite low. Well, they've just sent a message that maybe this property is overpriced. Yeah. So we're not helping our clients by saying too much,
Correct.
I just encourage them to put forward their strongest offer and best terms, and you'll present it as they'd like it presented,
Yeah, great point. And here's the most extreme case, and I understand I'm going way to the outside here, but if we did do that, if we divulged information and all of a sudden, offers came in a lot lower, and other agents have been known to talk to our sellers without our permission. I know that happens, right? And if all of a sudden that information came out that I was sharing that information, not only does that present a problem with me keeping a listing, but if they actually were financially harmed and they were astute enough legally, they could say, he is a liable party and there are damages. Now that's like ultra extreme, probably would never happen, but I always govern to let's steer clear of what is even possible, not just low probability. All right. So that's kind of yeah, go ahead.
Matt, it's kind of the same thing. I guess one question I had to ask, are we still a one permission recording state
Oh, yeah.
for phone? So we are. So really anybody could record you at any time. And two, it's kind of like when I'm showing, clients a home, I say, be careful what you say in here because there may be cameras all over the house. We have no idea.
Yeah.
So I guess it's always just be careful what you're saying, right?
Yep. John?
I just had that happen. I had a listing and the buyer's agent was talking about the house and they had their baby monitor on that my clients heard everything.
Oh, man. Oh,
So
man.
it was kind of fun.
Well, and in the day and age of Nest and
John, did they make an offer? Did those buyers make an offer?
They did. And we knew exactly where they were and we got everything in favor of the buyer because we knew what the buyers were willing to do and pay. And so
well, two related things to that, John. I had 2 agents in the past month ask me this. Do we have to disclose on the MLS that people can be recorded in our properties, like they have a microphone or video or whatever? What's your answer to that?
I don't know. I would probably have to say, no, I don't know. Well, you answer that. I would say no. I mean, it's their prerogative to have their cameras on or their recording devices on, I would think, but I don't know.
For sure. And yeah, so for sure. And Brandon was shaking his head no, and that is correct. Listen, where somebody has an expectation of privacy, they have the right to know. But in my house, do they have an expectation of privacy?
No.
They don't. I mean, listen, I've actually heard this argued both sides. It's pretty weak on the, well, they are there for a showing, but it's like, yeah, but they know it's your house. It's not a public space. It's a private space and they can record whatever they want, right? What was that, Brandon?
They're a guest in your house.
For sure. For sure.
You
Okay.
gotta be
And so
with the Ring doorbells outside too.
Oh my gosh.
So
yeah. I was helping Ron Snow, his niece and her husband needed to look at some properties down in Springville. And rather than have Ron drive an hour and a half, I'm like, dude, I got you. Let's set up a showing time on my way home. And it was a pretty good property. And that's my first dialogue is, hey, listen, let me just tell you up front, Ring doorbells inside the house. And by the way, the house was a open door. They record everything in open door, right?
Yep.
And so I told them, I'm like, I don't care how excited you get about this or whatever questions you want to ask, just walk around the house and go, and we'll get outside far away from the property and I'll answer all of your questions. So yeah, very good advice. All right. I wanted to jump on to our next topic here, which is kind of related to this. So when we're lucky enough to put a property under contract, I'm just kind of curious from you guys, what is the number one issue in your experience that you have to deal with as far as negotiations after you've gone under contract? Josh, I'm gonna pick on you. What's your number one issue that you have to deal with under contract properties as far as negotiating?
That's a really broad thing. I would say the biggest thing that we negotiate when I'm representing the buyer is the inspection report when that comes back. Usually we don't, usually if an appraisal comes back, we're trying to reevaluate the term or the comparables with the appraiser, not necessarily with the seller initially. I would say the inspection is the biggest thing that we try to renegotiate.
I think you hit them in the proper order. Number one is due diligence items. So it could come from your inspection. It could come from seller's disclosures. It could come from, and by the way, when I say, just so everybody on this call knows, when I say seller's disclosures, I mean all of Section 7, right? Which includes special assessments, if you're in HOA, minutes, all of that stuff, including the document. I'm going to take a little derail here for just a second, because this one is really common with agents. I even had to train our office manager staff on this. When you look at the REPSI, in fact, let me pull this up on the screen. It's probably worth pulling it up on the screen. REPSI. When you go to Section 7, move you guys this picture. This is always fun to do on a laptop. I have very little real estate to do a Zoom call. But when you go to section 7, right? Item A. Okay. Item A is, these are all the things the seller is going to disclose or provide. A written seller property condition disclosure for the property. Notice that the term seller property condition disclosure is not in caps. If it was in caps, it would be referring to a specific document like UAR's seller property condition disclosure form. I've said this before. If I hadn't ever lived in the property, I could be at dinner on a cocktail napkin and I could write, "I'm Matt Barton, know nothing wrong with this property, sign and date it." And I would have and I would label it seller property condition disclosure. I would just have jumped the hurdle in item number A, right? Item number A. The second part is, we get this a lot. If we provide the seller's disclosure form, the proper one from UAR, which I would always recommend a client do so that they're thorough, that is part of their get out of jail free card, over disclose at the front end while people are excited about buying the property. But if I lost my train of thought. Oh, so if we fill out this form and send it to the other side, I've had other agents say, "You need to send me back a signed copy." Is that true? I would just say, look at the REPSI that's in front of you. Is there any requirement to actually return a signed copy for your seller, right? No, the contractual obligation is there to provide seller property condition disclosures to the buyer, period. Good practice. It's always a great practice for us to get a signed copy back that verifies that they actually got them, reviewed them, but there's other ways for us to verify. So if you ever get in that sticky situation where the other side is just not cooperating on getting you a signed copy back, then make sure you let your office manager know that you've done that. You've sent emails, calls, and whatnot, and they're just not cooperating. And we've trained the office managers. If we've done our good best effort, we will move the file along. Okay. All right. So, Josh, you had mentioned the inspection report and the appraisal. I'm not going to deal with the appraisal today, but the inspection report is kind of interesting, right? So I'm going to quickly in the REPSI go to section 10.2 and 10.3. These are very important sections in the REPSI, primarily because they state that the buyer, this is the default starting place for a purchase contract, right? Is that the buyer is putting forward their offer, right? This is their contract that they're giving to us. And they're declaring in section 10.2, we understand we're buying it as is, right? And furthermore, in section 10.3, here's the things that the seller is going to do, right? They're going to disclose any known defects. But it goes on to say that once they've reviewed that, the seller will provide the property in the same general condition, but both section 10.2 and 10.3 have a unique phrase in it, which is they survive closing, right? So if somebody did not disclose, right? If somebody obscured something from the buyer being able to discover, and I love the term in there, right? It says just that cannot be discovered. This is in section 10.3, cannot be discovered by a reasonable inspection by an ordinary prudent buyer. Now listen, don't ever take too much stock in that phrase, because that is a legal phrase that is open for interpretation, and open for interpretation means possible litigation. So always err on the side of caution, unless it smacks them in the face, then you probably ought to be disclosing it, right? Here's one that I got recently is, well, I didn't know that the basement apartment was not an approved ADU. Whose responsibility is that? Is it the buyer or the seller? Josh, you're smiling.
The buyer, for sure the buyer.
For sure the buyer? Are you sure about that? Anybody want to argue with Josh? Because I do.
For sure the buyer.
For sure the buyer. Wow. All right, what's your rationale there, Brandon?
It's a mother-in-law
Uh,
apartment.
In the buyer due diligence that they signed at the beginning, they're in charge of checking out all that stuff. Can I put in a Harrison loan
man.
or a rental?
You know your contract. Let's go to what you're talking about. So
Matt,
in
can we
section,
Matt, can we use another example? Let's say they're advertising it as a 4-bedroom home, but really one of those rooms doesn't have a closet or an
okay,
appropriate window.
perfect.
Whose responsibility is it to confirm?
These are
that
all
they're not
these
like
are
a
all good
bedroom?
examples, and we could probably come up with 5 more. But here, I think it will hinge on this. So we start with section 10.2, which says you're buying the property as is, right? And here's the story I like to tell people because it's true. In 2009, the Division of Real Estate said, we're going to make this contract heavy on the buyer for their responsibility to figure everything out. But the trade-off is we're going to give them ironclad exits, right? In section 8.1, 8.2, 8.3. That's the trade-off. That was the balancing act. So you start with 10.2, and it makes reference to section 8.1, which, Josh, is your due diligence section. And there's interesting stuff in section 8.1, this whole paragraph, right? It starts off with buyer's due diligence shall consist of the buyer's review of the seller's disclosures referenced in section 7. That means all of section 7, and any other tests, evaluations, verifications of the property deemed necessary or appropriate by the buyer, such as, and then it gives them an exhaustive list. And to your point, Brandon, such as physical condition of the property, the existence of hazardous substances, environmental issues, geologic conditions, the square footage or acreage of the land and or improvement, the condition of the roof, walls, foundation, the condition of plumbing, electrical, mechanical, heating, air conditioning systems, fixtures, the condition of all appliances, the cost and availability of homeowners insurance and flood insurance, and if applicable, water source, availability and quality, location of property lines. I've had that one personally. Property lines, regulatory use restrictions. Oh, that would be your ADU, right? And Parker, to your question about what constitutes a bedroom. By the way, what does constitute a bedroom? Careful, it's a trick question.
You don't have to have a closet anymore. That's a new rule that I've heard. So it does have to have an egress window.
That is the biggest thing, is it has to have egress. It has to have, if
Is
there's
that
a
true?
fire.
You don't have to have a closet anymore?
Nope, you don't.
Wow, that's huge.
Now, some
Hold on.
appraisers might counteract that. I'm interested to hear what you're going to say, Matt. There are appraisers out there that will fight you on that. And there's sometimes you can't win. But so if you do come across that, just go to IKEA, buy a closet, put it in yourself or hire your handyman to do it, and then have them go over there and it'll count. But otherwise, yeah, it's not required anymore in the state.
Oh man, I'm so glad that Josh is here today.
Where's the new ruling on that?
There is no
There never
magic
was a
ruling
rule.
on this,
There never was.
It's
never-
expectation.
right? So here's the thing.
It's a
If you
big
think,
Utah expectation, but it isn't technically the definition of a bedroom.
let me
Never
give you
has
an
been.
example. Let me give you an example of where this breaks down. Anybody sold a 1800s home? Yeah.
In a
How many
while.
of those have closets?
None.
Oh, so they have no bedrooms? I mean, that's kind of how the argument goes, right?
Yeah.
So they have no bedrooms, if that's the definition. The point is, it's what is the expectation for that caliber of property, the year it was built, and it's really subjective to the appraiser. And listen, it's a hollow victory if the appraiser says it's not a bedroom and will not come off of their opinion, right? Because ultimately, that will affect the value of the property. So Parker, Joshua, you're right. I think there is becoming more liberty on that. And yes, certainly if there is a, what do they call it? Not a credenza. What's the
Wardrobe.
mobile- Thank you.
Armoire.
Wardrobe. Armoire. Yeah. If that's in the room, that sometimes will sway an appraiser, but not always. Right.
Let's talk for a minute about egress too. What are you guys seeing? You know, the 1950s homes in the basements with the small windows that clearly.
Yeah.
No way you're getting out of those.
Yeah, I've seen appraisers count those as bedrooms.
Yeah, that's
Well,
Because
grandfathered in.
they're grandfathered in.
Yeah, they're grandfathered in, right? And so
It's a
Yes,
death
if there are
trap.
any major renovations that happen to the home and that is run through the city, they will need to make those egress windows appropriate to the size and the.
But if
the
you haven't done any
requirements.
of that,
So if you go to the city at all with doing any basement remodeling and the city has to approve anything, you better be sure that you're replacing those windows.
Well, and here's a further complication. Are you talking a conventional loan or FHA? Because I can slam the door shut, pun intended, on an FHA loan. They just will not do it, period.
Hmm.
Right?
You mean they won't count it or they won't loan
They
on the
will not,
house?
they will not count it if it does not meet the minimum requirement size of a window for egress. FHA will just slam the door shut on that. Now, conventional is a little more loose. It depends on their guidelines. But yeah. All right,
Well, Matt,
so
it depends on the appraiser again, because I just got one 3 months ago that got approved, and it was exactly what Haley was talking about.
was it
and it was
FHA?
an FHA loan.
Well, that's not to say a small window won't work. They have a
Oh,
minimum
gotcha.
size, right?
Okay,
They have a
yeah.
minimum size. In other words, a fat guy like me has got to wiggle his way out without greasing my hips.
I would
Well,
die.
and I've been
Nobody even
really
laughed at that.
surprised at how little value the appraisers are even giving for additional bedrooms.
Yeah.
I've talked to several, not in recent months, but they said no value. It doesn't
Well-
matter if it's got that extra bedroom or if it's the square footage. We're going off the square footage. It's irrelevant
So
whether
for
it's got a
years,
partition or not. So
yeah. So for years, I rode my bike. I did a lot of biking back in the day and rode with 2 lifetime appraisers. And we would have, when you ride for hours at a time, you cover everything under the sun. And since I was in real estate and their appraisers, we would have these discussions. And Haley, to your point, they said 95% of our valuation is acreage and square footage, usable square footage, especially square footage above the floor. When it comes to how many functional bedrooms, or if there's granite counters or cool cabinets, those are small. They're not non-factors, but they're small factors. Their starting point is acreage and usable square footage. So, all right. I need to move this along. So when we are, sorry, I was trying to get to the resolution of due diligence.
Now, when you say usable square footage, you mean above ground square footage?
Both, but
Okay.
yes, again, depending on what the loan product is, right? And certainly how many bedrooms are above ground carries more value than something that's in the basement, for sure. Okay,
I just had a deal, Parker. Great question. Just quick follow-up on that. I just had a deal where we were purchasing a property that the basement bathroom was not finished. There was no shower installed, and there was a wall missing between the bedroom and the bathroom. And so this appraiser did not count that bedroom as a bedroom because there was no wall between the bedroom and the bathroom. And he did not count that 3/4 bath as a bathroom. So comparables he pulled in the area were comparable if you were not counting those 2 things. And so we had to be really careful with sending him over a reappraisal or a value when we were looking at that, because he said, I can't count that.
How did you
Yeah,
find that information out, Josh? Did you talk to the appraiser directly?
No.
Yeah.
The appraiser said go
yeah,
through his.
tell me
his
how that
department.
works, Parker.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, it's funny, you know, I've had a couple of deals like that where they're like, well, we should just call the appraiser, you know, the lender's like, we should just call the appraiser together. And I'm like, no, dude, I don't want to have anything to do with it.
I do everything in
Does
writing.
Dodd-Frank
Yeah.
ring a bell?
I do everything in writing. Email is always my friend when it comes to appraisers, because
Yeah.
if I can present to the appraisers a good proposition, they can easily forward that email on to their management team, and they don't even have to do anything. And we can get a reappraisal if I write it appropriately and with strong data, that the appraiser can go back to his management team saying, I'm going to change it because of these reasons. He just uses my email.
If you talk to Ashley, good point, Josh. If you talk to Ashley Wolthius, who's a very well-respected appraiser, right, sits on national committees and does a good book of business, I think she would echo this. In fact, I think I've heard her echo this is, listen, appraisers are just like any cross section of our society, right? There's good ones, there's bad ones, there's ones with good communication skills. Always assume that you've got to do a little work. So don't come out antagonistic and I'll be like, how the hell did you come up with that stupid number that you're probably not going to get anywhere? But you say, hey, listen, appreciate the work you did. I don't know if you're aware of this comp. It appears to be, you know, a good comp that was not considered. Here's why it's a good comp. And make sure you're doing apples to apples, because appraisers are really good at picking that out. If you're doing an apples to orange comparison, like, dude, that doesn't even fly. Why are you even wasting my time? But yeah, if you can do that and create some accountability by having your lender talk to the AMC, right? There's typically a manager at the AMC going, we appear to have some data that is contradictory. Would you just like a solid look at that? And it just greatly increases your odds of potentially getting a change. And Joshua, fantastic point. Always create a paper trail. Conversations are worthless when push comes to shove. All right, here's where I wanted to finish. Since repairs, in my opinion, my experience in 20 plus years, is that most of the concerns come from repairs. This is why I started with section 10.2 and 10.3. The buyer is writing the REPSI. This is their contract. And in their own contract, they're saying, we understand our offer is being made based on as is condition. Now, there's a carve out that we get in a period to inspect it to make sure it is as we thought it was, but they should not come back to the point where it's like, well, you know, we really wanted 4 bedrooms instead of 3. Well, you knew that going in. It's on the MLS. When you walked through the property, you saw that there was 3. Can't really, like, with intellectual honesty, given section 10.2, come and say, well, that's a valid point for negotiating. You're the one that wrote your offer, and you wrote it based on its as is condition. Now, there are other things that come up, right? The water heater's at the end of its life. There's a crack on the foundation wall that is actually growing and separate. Those are things that are legitimate to debate and negotiate with the other side. So this is why I wanted to quickly cover the resolution of due diligence addendum. I still get agents who bypass this addendum and just free form it in a blank addendum. What's the problem with that? What's one problem? What's one problem with that?
On writing.
You're becoming a lawyer, right? And your
Yeah.
profession on the buyer's due diligence form, it lists all the things that you are not in a real estate
Yes.
transaction.
Correct. Here's I'm glad you brought that up, Josh. We have our buyers sign a buyer due diligence form. Everybody knows this form. The attorneys I've worked with over the years quite literally call that form the get out of jail free form. But it has one caveat. Hey, Ron. Ron just walked into St. George. There's one caveat to that protection. That form declares all the things that you're not. But Josh, if you then start talking like you're an expert on zoning in a particular city, you just lost that protection. You can't declare, hey, I'm not a pro in that area, and then start talking like you're a pro in that area. Make sense? So if you have the luxury of having that document protect you, I'm not saying you have to be like, I can't say, I can't. There's ways to say it. Listen, I'm not an expert in that area. My experience has shown me this, that, and the other, but that's why we have you sign the buyer due diligence. You really need to employ an expert if that's really important to you. Can I do that? I can do that all day long. But don't turn around and be like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years and I just know that's not the way this is. Now you're acting as an expert. Okay. So the resolution of due diligence addendum, something comes up, we need to negotiate with the other side because we're not going to take the property as is. Both parties still want to do the deal. There's 3 options in the resolution of due diligence form. And Josh, to your point, you're correct. My favorite term is they're becoming a realtor at law, right? That's a joke. It's a misnomer. A realtor at law. You're not a realtor. We are one of the few professions in the state where they allow us to act as an attorney, but in a very restricted fashion, right? And that restriction is based on what is called filling in forms. Now, I've had agents who like to write exhaustive addenda, say, well, it's a blank form, and they say I can fill it in. It's like, well, you damn well better make sure you know exactly what you're writing, then it'll stand up in court, because once you start writing that stuff, you're taking on liability, right? So yes, you can write it, but you do it at your own peril. And if the division or it's industry acceptable to use a particular form and it has been written by an attorney and is available to you and you don't use it, you just increase your liability further. So this one is approved by attorneys, and let's jump into it. 3 options. You can pay me some closing costs to get me past my current angst with your property, right? And it's very clear that that one's a super easy option. Just like that one, number 2 is we can reduce the purchase price. Now listen, let's stop there for a second. Why choose the price reduction versus the third option, which is repairs made by the seller? What would you, if you were representing me as your buyer, why would you tell me to use option number 2 versus option number 3? Because I want to get into the house with everything working, right?
Who's going to be the judge that got fixed right?
Very good. Well, it does give you some provisions for that. And I'm going to go in a little deeper on that, but why else? What is the caliber of different repair people, from concrete to stucco to roofing to sheetrock to electrical to plumbing? I don't know who Josh is. Yeah, they're all over the map, John. I don't know who you're going to choose, but I got guys that I've known over the years that do a quality job, right? I may want to just reduce the price, save that money, and pay my own guys to do it so I know it's done right. Valid. That's a valid point, right? Now, if we go to section number 3, repairs made to be made by the seller, and this is to your point, Brandon, seller and buyer agree the seller will be responsible for the completion of repairs by the settlement deadline. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing, seller shall, through contractors, notice it didn't say licensed contractors. It just says contractors. Through contractors, completely repair the repairs to comply with applicable law, including governmental permit, inspection, or approval requirements. All repairs shall be performed in a workmanlike manner. What does that mean? Remember what I said about ambiguous terms that can be litigated? Everybody has a different view of what workmanlike manner is considered, with materials of quality and appearance comparable. What does that mean? Again, subjective, open for interpretation, argument, litigation. So if you choose option number 3, I would recommend, or if your client chooses option number 3, I would make sure that I did an addendum that clarified a few points in section 3. All construction to be done by Utah licensed contractors, right? They have to have a license, because then that creates some liability for them, right? It's got to be done the correct way. And oh, by the way, if I scroll down here, notice in section 3.1, it says, okay, if you choose this option number 3, what happens if the repairs aren't done per the conditions, including the ones we would write in an addendum, like, oh, it wasn't done by a licensed contractor. And oh, by the way, you probably should have something in there and provide documentation of the licenses, right? Versus, well, he told me he was licensed. If it gets to the point where you're at closing and those repairs have not been completed, then what? Well, if as of the settlement deadline, the repairs have not been completed, this red section, buyer may enter into an escrow agreement with the sellers. How many of you had experience with lenders recently allowing you to put things in escrow?
They don't like to do it.
I closed
They
one.
do not like to do it. What's that, Brandon?
I closed one last month.
Do they like doing it?
No, but it had to do with painting the exterior of the house, and it's too cold.
Yeah. If it's not like going to structurally affect the house, and like you said, painting the exterior or something like that, that's fine. But let's use a more extreme example. The roof's leaking, but we don't want to get it repaired. If I'm a lender, think about it. If you're the lender, do you want to lend on a house that has current active leaks that could actually destroy the value, which means if I have to foreclose on it, I can't get my money out of it? This is why most lenders are very apprehensive about that option of escrowing items. They want to lend on what is today, not what could be in the future.
The other fun
Right.
part is you have to escrow 150% of the 2 highest bids.
Yeah. And then what happens if, a month later, or when it warms up in April, it's painted and somebody doesn't like it? I mean, it creates a lot of problems. And this is why there's a lot of apprehension about doing it. I'm not saying it's not possible. It's just a lot of apprehension. Okay, so you can escrow it. Or if it's not approved by the lender, then the buyer may alternatively elect one of the following remedies, either 3.1A or 3.1B, and here they are. So if 3.1A or 3.1B is not checked, by the way, then escrow is the sole remedy. So mental note, if you're using this form and you want to make sure that one of these is checked, A or B, don't leave it blank, because if the lender will not allow escrow and that's your only remedy, your client's screwed. Right? They don't perform, then they're in default. Right? So 3.1A, 3.1B. A, buyer may cancel the REPC. And in addition to the return of the earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, except from the seller, as liquidated damages, the sum equal to the earnest money deposit. Seller agrees to pay and by the way, this is a great line in there. I'm glad they put this in there. Seller agrees to pay the liquidated damages to buyer upon demand, not like documentation or contractually. It says if the things weren't done and the buyer demands it, you don't have a choice. You're contractually obligated. Okay.
So
Item B.
to be clear,
Yeah.
Matt, this is not, oh, you get your earnest money back and we call it sixes and walk away. It's, we get our earnest money back and the seller has to pay us an equivalent amount of the earnest money.
Correct. Correct.
What if they turn this, what if they gave us this form after their deadline and we agreed to it? Do they still have an opportunity to get their earnest money back?
Oh, good question. So good. So there's a lot of stuff like this, John, contractually. So we have a deadline in 24B, right? Your due diligence deadline, or A, sorry. No, I can't remember. Is A seller's disclosures and B is due diligence. Okay, so when the due diligence deadline has passed, if you sign another document that addends that or modifies that, that now governs. So if this document was signed after that, it trumps the language that is in the due diligence and tied to the due diligence deadline. Does that make sense?
So if they didn't like the way that we fixed something, they can get their earnest money back.
Correct.
Interesting. Cool.
Depending on how you structured this particular addendum. All right. Item B, buyer may complete the purchase of the property and then pursue any other remedies available at law after closing. And here's the key sentence. The terms of this section 3 is inclusive and shall survive closing. So any of the damages that are in there, right? So there's this doctrine in our contract that says once your buyer signs, they're deeming their due diligence waived, they're accepting the property as is, and there's limited claims. But the opening to reverse that is when you have the language in a section that says it will survive closing. So, right, everybody wants to get the deal done. There's $30,000 of whatever roofing repairs that need to be done, and the seller is delinquent, derelict in their duty. The buyer has the option to say, you know what, I'm going to close on it anyway. And the contract, which I can then go take to court, says and shows the seller was supposed to do X, Y, or Z. I can take that to court, right? And it does survive closing. This document can be used after the fact. And oh, by the way, since it applied, then that also means that section 17 of the REPC still comes into play, right? And even section 16, you defaulted, I can pursue any one of the 3 remedies, and oh, by the way, I still get attorney's fees paid. So let me bring this all back in because we're just about out of time. I think that here's what I want you to take away today. Stay within the guardrails of the forms that are created. They're typically well thought out. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they're almost always more well thought out than you taking a blank addendum and saying, I can write this better, right? It's usually been through a committee with other brokers and agents and reviewed by sometimes the DRE if it's the REPC, and there's just safety in using the form. And if you can force yourself to go through the form, it's hard for somebody, your client, to claim that you did not fulfill your fiduciary of reasonable care, right? This is the form that attorneys reviewed. I have limited ability as an attorney. I used the form. It's pretty hard for you to come after me. Make sense? But here's the last thing I would say with all of this. As a broker, I've had many opportunities to deal with other agents and other brokers. And so I've seen the spectrum. And it's just an interesting exercise in human nature. When I get a call from a John Hyatt that says, hey, Matt, you know what? Having a problem on this transaction. I was hoping that I could employ your help on your side so we can keep this deal together. So both of our clients get what they want. Man, that is a great opening. I'm happy to work with a John Hyatt all day when he starts like that, right? But the minute Haley, and I can use this Haley because it's so facetious, you would never be this person, comes and says, and I'm using examples from real life, your agent is a complete jackhole and you need to get this figured out or there's going to be a lawsuit. What do you think my take is on that?
Up yours.
Our human nature is when somebody talks like
Hey,
that.
Matt, is jackhole a legal term or is that?
It is.
Okay, I didn't know.
But when somebody starts off like that, our human nature is just, I'm going to take you down a peg, right? You're not all that in a bag of chips, right? And so I'm going to get entrenched really quickly. That is just our human nature. Now, if you've done this long enough, I would say to Haley, clearly, there's a lot of emotion on this. I can totally understand. Looks like the deal's going sideways, but let's you and me reset here. I want to work with you, right? But it's really not helpful when you start hurling terms before I've even had a chance to try and help you, right? So let's just steer clear of that. I get the emotion. I'm not even faulting you, but please don't do that. Is that appropriate? And guess what? It works most of the time. There's some that will just continue being Parker jackholes. So not you, I'm just saying. So negotiation is some science and it's more art form. And if you can keep your eye on the prize and try and protect the relationship, sometimes even when the other side isn't deserving of it, you're still going to do better for yourself and for your clients. And most people after the fact will come back with a high level of appreciation and saying things like, hey man, thanks for keeping your cool. I was at my wit's end. I apologize. And now you've fostered a relationship in the industry and will be helpful in your business going forward. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining the call. I hope you guys, anybody else going down to R4? Just me? All right. Well, I'll report back some good stuff. It's the 50-year anniversary for RE/MAX and should be an exciting time. Although I'm not a super big fan of Las Vegas, but we'll muscle through it.
Thanks,
Hey,
Matt.
Daryl.
I'm here, Matt.
Well, Daryl, we're just wrapping up the call.
Yeah, no, I've been listening to the whole thing. I just couldn't talk. I'm at R4 and just a minute, I'll show you a picture. Maybe I can. I probably have the technology to do that. Well, maybe next time. I'll
He's
turn
having a
this way.
hard time.
Yeah, how about that?
And Savannah, I have a quick call with you afterwards, but I'm going to hit the road and I'll call you from my car.
Sounds good.
Thank you everybody for being on the call. Please, if you're running across issues that are proving problematic for you, please let me know. Love to help address them in a group format. Okay, guys, have a good one.
Thanks,
See ya.
Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, see ya.
Bye-bye.